Hi, everybody. In the early years of Pope Francis's pontificate, he was elected in 2013, there were signs that he was going to bring together the great kind of alternative streams in Catholic life and thought over the past 50 years. This is sometimes called liberal and conservative Catholicism. Liberal Catholicism is thought to be concerned with social justice and causes like environmentalism. Conservative Catholicism is thought to be about individual conversion and sanctification through a practice of the faith. Of course, they overlap, and this liberal conservative distinction isn't so good. But many things that Pope Francis did in his early years were meant to bring these two together, or so I would propose. One of the signature moments of that effort was, it seems to me, his encyclical Laudato Si. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. This document was published in 2015, and it was the first encyclical published by Pope Francis in his own voice, but it has really been a signature of his entire pontificate, this focus not only on the climate, but on justice. So let's take a look at this document and try in just a brief kind of compass to highlight its main themes and convey what it was intended to express. Here we have a cover of the document as issued by the church on care for our common home. And we'll say a bit why it's called Laudato Si in a minute. Here we have Pope Francis around the time of its promulgation. This is an encyclical, importantly. It's a book-length encyclical. It's quite a robust document, but an encyclical is a letter circulated by the Pope originally to other bishops, but since the 60s or since the 1950s and later, also to all people of goodwill. So, what is Laudato Si? As I say, the first encyclical issued by Pope Francis in his own voice. It was preceded by Evangelii Gaudium, an apostolic exhortation, which was an important early document of Pope Francis, as well as by an encyclical written by his predecessor, Benedict the 16th. Who, of course, resigned from office before he was able to publish that. So Laudato Si was much awaited when Pope Francis was elected. This was going to be a kind of statement of the core themes of his pontificate. It was followed later by Fratelli Tutti, another encyclical focused on social themes. So both of these are seen as important contributions to the tradition of Catholic social teaching. And it has launched in subsequent years. So I'm recording this in 2024, so it's been about 9 years since this was launched. It's launched many efforts to transform Catholic responses to the ecological crisis and to integrate care for the earth with care for the poor. And we'll say a bit more about that in my reading of the document. That is its single central theme, joining care for people with care for the natural world. This has been followed in 2023, just the end of last year, by another apostolic exhortation, a document in authority a little less extensive than an encyclical. Encyclical is the most kind of official document that a pope can issue. An apostolic exhortation is a little bit less than that. It's a much shorter document. But Laudate Deum was released in advance of the synod. Right now, the church is engaged in a long process known as a synod. And it involved some in-person meetings at the end of 2023. So just before that, on the occasion of it, the Pope released a document kind of reviewing the themes of Laudato Si from the vantage of that period of time. Okay, friends, Laudato Si. The title is in Tuscan dialect, and it is a direct quotation from Saint Francis of Assisi, from whom I believe, Pope Francis takes his name. It's a document or a text written by St. Francis called the Canticle of the Sun. Here we have a mosaic illustrating some of the themes from that Canticle of the Sun, including also a quotation, "Be praised, my Lord," St. Francis writes there, "through all your creatures, especially through my Lord brother sun, who brings the day, and you give light through him." This image of praising God through God's creatures is very important. You could say that being kind of hung up on, being motivated by, being focused on protection of the natural world is almost a kind of idolatry. It's something that's leading us away from God, right? I mean, within these Abrahamic traditions, there's God and there's the world, and these are very separate things. And the great Christian mystics all will say, don't dwell on the things of the world. Focus instead on God and on your relationship with God. That is the Christian spiritual path. But what Francis is introducing here is that care for creation, so to speak, care for the natural world, can itself be a means of praising God through the natural world. Just like on my phone, there are icons, right? I tap the icon and I go through the icon to the application that the icon represents. Well, in the same way, by attending to the icons of God in this world, that is, everything God has created, we can be led to the Creator, to their source. Here's another beautiful image created by a contemporary artist that she made available online, depicting some images associated with the Canticle of the Sun and introducing helpfully some of the themes. Thank you to this artist. Be praised, my Lord, through all your creatures. Brother sun and sister moon and the stars, brother wind, sister water, brother fire, sister and mother earth, right? Also, people who forgive and people who endure in peace, endure suffering in peace, as well as sister death and people who seek your will. So Francis is addressing all of these and is personifying the wind, the water, the fire, the sun, and the moon, the earth itself, not in the manner of introducing kind of pagan style nature deities, but of recognizing the personal way in which the Christian connects with all of God's creatures and all of God's creation. And it calls that person to be more forgiving and to be seeking God's will. What's the structure of Laudato Si is 6 chapters after following an introduction. I believe there's also a short conclusion where Francis introduces a couple of prayers. What we're going to touch on here is the introduction and portions of chapters 3 and 4. In the first chapter, he basically outlines what's the problem, drawing on recent scientific literature detailing the nature of the climate crisis. In the second chapter, the Gospel of Creation, he draws on biblical sources to ground his response. In chapters 3 and 4, which we'll focus on, he introduces his account of why we're in this ecological crisis and of what the response should be, and he calls that response integral ecology. We'll also just have a couple passages from chapters 1 and 6, because chapters 5 and 6 are focused with kind of what to do about that, how to implement that vision. In chapter 1, he introduces some key elements of the problem. Some overall themes across these 6 chapters, plus intro and conclusion. This is the first point, is the one I want to really highlight, right? The same misguided way of seeing and thinking underlies injustice and violence against other people, that is, the poor and marginalized in our societies, as well as injustice and violence against the natural world. So when you talk about, environmental activism, call it, right? Climate, people concerned with climate change, and you talk about people concerned with what might be called life issues or religion in public life or something like this. What Pope Francis is doing, again, in this mode of bringing together all members of the church in a common project, is saying these are 2 aspects of the same thing. You're not choosing between whether I support liberal causes or conservative causes, that both of these are motivated by the same deficiency, as it were, a deficiency of seeing and of thinking, a way of seeing the world that's leading us to engage in injustice and exploitation across these spheres. This way, jumping to the third point, is called the technocratic paradigm. That is a kind of technical sounding term. We're going to get onto that in just a moment. But that will detail what he thinks the problem is. This prevents us from seeing something he repeats 3 or 4 times throughout the document, that quote unquote, everything is connected. I have another lecture on this channel about the work of the Catholic theologian Elizabeth Johnson in her book Ask the Beasts. And she makes very much the same kind of argument in presenting what she calls the community of creation paradigm. Right? There's a way of seeing, a paradigm that presents ourselves as human beings as fully on par with all other creatures, with all other created natural life. We have certain specific gifts and responsibilities and rights, even, but that this does not separate us from that creation. Well, I hear Pope Francis echoing that same kind of sentiment here, that everything and all people also are connected. To correct this, he thinks, as we've said, we need integral ecology, and we also need to undergo what he calls an ecological conversion. And we'll come to that in just a few minutes. My own contribution here would be, I mean, in addition to whatever comments I'm making as we go, this expresses a kind of personalist ethics. This is a movement that's been of concern to me in my research in the past. What does this focus on? It focuses on individual encounter, right? So brother, sun, sister, moon, right? We treat the sun and the moon not just as, standing reserve material stuff out there, but almost as persons, brother and sister, right? We encounter natural things in the mode of a personal encounter. We show justice toward those things as fellow creatures of a single good God. We need to integrate all different aspects of ourselves, right, into a single kind of whole person approach to these problems. And we also are focused on personal conversion, that addressing these problems is not just a technical matter, but is something that's going to require a personal sacrifice and an investment on the part of those who wish to do so. Let's look at some passages from the document and see how he kind of fills this out. This one is from the very beginning. This is the very first paragraph in the document, quoting St. Francis, Laudato Si, mi signore. Praise be to you, my Lord. In the words of this beautiful canticle, the Canticle of the Sun, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home, the earth, is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Quote, Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruits and colored flowers and herbs. Close quote. There he's quoting St. Francis. The sister, the earth, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. So, the earth herself, to continue with that personal kind of metaphor, cries out, right? The earth is the poor. The earth is exploited. The earth is being marginalized. And so our concern for social justice, our concern for the dignity of the human person should extend as well to our concern for the natural world. This might seem kind of like a rosy-colored, naive romanticism, he acknowledges, but he contends that it is not, writing the following. Francis's disciple, St. Bonaventure, Pope Francis writes, tells us that, from a reflection on the primary source of all things, filled with even more abundant piety, Francis would call creatures, no matter how small, by the name of brother or sister, close quote. Pope Francis continues, such a conviction cannot be written off as naive romanticism, for it affects the choices which determine our behavior. If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, then our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. So this paradigm, he thinks, this new way of seeing, he calls it integral ecology, will help to change our behavior. If we see things differently, if we think things differently, we will conduct ourselves differently. And this can lead to, as we'll see later on, a transformation of human culture. So that's what he's calling for. This is not only the climate change encyclical, this is also concerned with ethical, moral, human issues. At the center of the encyclical I have proposed is this linking, that care for the earth is linked to care for the poor. Often, however, Francis argues, we forget this, and people involved in environmental causes might not fully recognize the importance of care for the poor. They lose touch with everyday human life. Let's see how he expresses this. Many professionals, opinion makers, communications media, and centers of power, he writes, are far removed from the poor, with little direct contact with their problems. This lack of physical contact and encounter can lead to a numbing of conscience and to tendentious analyses, which neglect parts of reality. At times, this attitude exists side by side with a, quote, green rhetoric. Today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment, so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, to hear both. Right? So if we are dealing with, I don't know, the Paris Climate Summit, for example, some years ago. I am not familiar enough with the details of that summit to certainly cast any aspersions. I mean, an agreement was reached, right? But Pope Francis is here calling for people engaged in activities of that kind, high-level green activities to save the earth. Also, always to remain cognizant of, attentive to, engaged personally with the cry of the poor, with the actual life situation of people who will be affected by the policies enacted, and also by the changes in climate that might follow from our previous actions. What's the culprit in all of this? I've suggested above that both economic exploitation, social, political exploitation of people, and exploitation of the earth, Pope Francis thinks they have a common root. He calls this root the technocratic paradigm. Let's see how he talks about this. Quote from Pope Francis. The basic problem is the way that humanity has taken up technology and its development according to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. Emphasis in original. According to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. This paradigm, I add, this way of seeing, that's what a paradigm means, exalts the concept of a subject, that is, a person, a free agent, who, using logical and rational procedures, progressively approaches and gains control over an external object, that is, stuff in the world that we want to manipulate, control, design, develop. This subject, person, makes every effort to establish the scientific and experimental method, which in itself is already a technique of possession, mastery, and transformation. It is as if the subject, the person, were to find itself in the presence of something formless, completely open to manipulation. So if I am a human subject, and so this is like subject-object, like that's just your subjective opinion, you might say, okay, I'm a human subject. I want to control my environment. I mean, I'm controlling my environment right now. I got dressed in this way this morning. I'm recording using technology right now. I'm trying to do it in a way that achieves, the effect that I want to have and so forth, right? I am a subject controlling various objects to achieve a certain purpose. Pope Francis is not saying, if you read this section closely and carefully, and I'd recommend chapter 3 especially to all readers' attention, he's not saying that we should just go back to having no technology at all, but that as we develop technology, we need to keep in mind, well, as he put it above, the cry of the poor, the human element, but we always need to seek to integrate that technology into our human communities and not to integrate our human communities into the logic of that technology. The problem with this paradigm is that we have done the latter. We have given up on our human communities and pursued kind of blindly the paths opened up by technology. Technocratic, by the way, kratia is the Greek word for power, and techne means skill. So this would mean the power of technical skill. Power today is exercised by people who are able to marshal the capacities of technology. There are consequences to this. So he takes kind of an abstract approach in talking about this paradigm and ways of seeing and thinking and stuff. But this makes a difference concretely in people's lives. He writes about this in the following passage. The technocratic paradigm also tends to dominate economic and political life. The economy accepts every advance in technology with a view to profit, without concern for its potentially negative impact on human beings. Finance overwhelms the real economy. At the same time, we have a sort of super development of a wasteful and consumerist kind, which forms an unacceptable contrast with the ongoing situations of dehumanizing deprivation. While we are all too slow in developing economic institutions and social initiatives, which can give the poor regular access to basic resources. So he's talking about economic life and political life, right? So in economic life, financial capitalism, he thinks, is utterly removed from human concerns, right? I mean, you're growing capital, you're growing money in the financial system in a way that is not connected to, the mom and pop store on Main Street, right? And there's a difference distance that emerges, between people engaged in that that sector of economic activity and kind of everyday human life. At the same time, we have this quote unquote super development, right? And this is what he refers to in one place in the document as a throwaway culture, right? We buy a lot of stuff from, I don't know, Amazon or Alibaba or whatever it is, and we use it for a couple of years and then we chuck it out, right? And we do so without connection to the production or the distribution of that. It's all a very abstract process. This is, he thinks, a manifestation of that same way of seeing, the technocratic paradigm. What's the result, or what's the next step, right? Okay, so we've acknowledged that we have this maybe technical way of interacting with people and nature. This distances us from their real concerns. This creates all kind of social problems. What can we do about it? Well, he proposes the following. All of this shows the urgent need for us to move forward in a bold cultural revolution. Science and technology, Pope Francis writes, are not neutral. From the beginning to the end of a process, various intentions and possibilities are in play and can take on distinct shapes. Nobody is suggesting a return to the Stone Age, okay? But we do need to slow down and look at reality in a different way, to appropriate the positive and sustainable progress which has been made, but also to recover the values and the great goals swept away by our unrestrained delusions of grandeur. So our technocratic way of seeing, our technocratic paradigm, has led us into unrestrained delusions of grandeur. I can just buy consumer products constantly, right, without any thought for their production or sustainability. I can, get absorbed into technology and continue just to mechanically increase the efficiency of that technology year over year. He's not saying that that increase in efficiency is itself bad, but if it is the basis for our entire way of being in the world, then we need to, quote, slow down and look at reality in a different way. So he's not calling for the elimination of technology, although he is kind of techno-skeptical in many of these passages, but for the more human integration of that technology into our lives. Just a couple more here. A new humanism. So he uses this term for to characterize, I think, or to give a name in a way to the kind of new approach that he wants to see, this slowing down and seeing reality in a different way. We urgently need, he writes, a humanism capable of bringing together the different fields of knowledge, including economics, in the service of more integral and integrating vision. Today, the analysis of environmental problems cannot be separated from the analysis of human, family, work related, and urban contexts, nor from how individuals relate to themselves, which leads in turn to how they relate to others and to the environment. There is an interrelation between ecosystems and between the various spheres of social interaction, demonstrating yet again that, quote, the whole is greater than a part, than the part. Another line that he repeats a number of times in the document. So we need a new humanism. What do we not need? Perhaps transhumanism, an attempt to move beyond humanity, to, as it were, leave the poor behind, or to transform the poor, people living in traditional human ways, into kind of techno denizens of a new, of a brave new future, perhaps something like that. Pope Francis is not entirely a Luddite here, but he's calling for not a post-humanism or a transhumanism, but a humanism, right? A grounding in everyday human life. So there are just a couple further passages about how this plays out that I want to look at. Here he talks about what he calls the ecology of daily life. So when he's talking about ecology in human societies, he's not only talking about formal financial institutions or environmental groups. He's talking about everyday human life. Authentic development, he writes, includes efforts to bring about an integral improvement in the quality of human life. And this entails considering the setting in which people live their lives. These settings influence the way we think, feel, and act. Examples: in our rooms, our homes, our workplaces, and neighborhoods, we use our environment as a way of expressing our identity. We make every effort to adapt to our environment, but when it is disorderly, chaotic, or saturated with noise and ugliness, such overstimulation makes it difficult to find ourselves integrated and happy. So, takeaway: when you're designing your environments, try not to be disorderly, chaotic, or saturated with noise and ugliness. Sounds good. I mean, there are efforts in this direction in the area of urban planning. I know that King Charles has, in fact, been involved in some kinds of efforts to create these integrated human communities. I don't think Pope Francis is calling for a kind of separation from urban life or from civilized life, but he is calling for Christians to be a kind of leaven, perhaps Catholics, within those societies, calling them to, what would it be? Orderliness, beauty, and not noise. There are some passages as well in the heading here is human ecology. Pope Francis includes in this document, in ways that are not often highlighted, statements of traditional Catholic teaching on life issues and other matters. But it's important that these be noted because for Francis, these are part of the overall vision. Let's read it and then I'll comment briefly. Human ecology, he writes, also implies another profound reality: the relationship between human life and the moral law, which is inscribed in our nature and is necessary for the creation of a more dignified environment. Learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. Also, valuing one's body in its femininity or masculinity is necessary if I am going to be able to recognize myself in an encounter with someone who is different. In this way, we can joyfully accept the specific gifts of another man or woman, the work of God, the Creator, and find mutual enrichment. So the acceptance of nature is extended not only to the affirmation of the good of, so to speak, natural environments, lakes and rivers and waterways and such things, um, uh, all of nature, but ourselves as well. We have a certain nature, and natural law relates to the moral life, right? So all of these aspects of nature are included in his vision, tending again to the conclusion that this is not simply the climate change encyclical. This is a much broader call, a mandate of Pope Francis's pontificate to address all of these various dimensions. And this will be our last slide, friends. Near the end here, brings this to a discussion of the common good. This is taken up especially in his next major encyclical on social issues, Fratelli Tutti. It might just be his next encyclical outright in 2020. He anticipates that here. An integral ecology, he proposes, is inseparable from the notion of the common good, a central and unifying principle of social ethics. The common good is the sum of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. This is the definition of the common good that he presents. Underlying the principle of the common good is respect for the human person as such, endowed with basic and inalienable rights, ordered to his or her integral development. And so again, the not only is he addressing Catholics in this document, I mean, Catholics are perhaps called in a special or at least particular way to engage in this effort to achieve a society that better reflects the values of an integral ecology. But all people are called to, as a matter of pursuing the common good, challenge the technocratic paradigm that he thinks has so constrained our vision and so distorted our world. So there you have, friends, an effort on my part to express what I take to be the key themes and message of Laudato Si. This is not simply the climate change encyclical. Yes, it does engage with that. But by the natural world here, Francis is including all of human culture. He's including human nature, human biology, the dignity of human life. And he's trying to bring together, as I've proposed at least here, so-called liberal and so-called conservative Catholics in a common project to remake our world in a way that he believes more fully lives out the values of the gospel. So thank you very much for your attention.